So a lot has happened to Cyberpunk 2077 since it came out in December last year. Somehow we were able to witness both the biggest launch this past generation and the quickest fall from grace for one of gaming's most beloved companies. That's why I think it'd be interesting to take a look back at what actually changed in the game over the past 12 months and if it's finally worth your time. Especially now we're heading into 2022 and things look a little bit more brighter than what they were back in 2020, so let's jump right in. Now just to go over a quick recap of what happened, Cyberpunk launched in December of 2020 after several delays by CD Projekt Red, citing of course the need for more development time. And while some grew frustrated with anticipation, most, including myself, were willing to wait no matter what, as long as that meant a better end game. Of course, we all know what followed next, and what was this generation's most anticipated game of all time quickly turned into one of its biggest disappointments. Reports of major issues quickly came in, and they painted a picture completely different than what CD Projekt Red's marketing team was trying to make in the months leading to the game's release. This included, but wasn't limited to, gameplay bugs, glitches, performance issues, crashes, with the old-gen consoles being most affected, despite CDPR's CEO making assurances about it literally days before release. On top of that, the relatively short main campaign, seemingly almost irrelevant life path system, non-existent AI, and a heap of other missing or misinterpreted features didn't help either. It didn't take too long for Sony to step in, and just a week after Cyberpunk's release, it already got pulled out from the PlayStation Store. It took CD Projekt Red over 6 months and almost a dozen patches to even bring it back, but by then it was far too late as the damage has already been done. Cyberpunk has lost over 85% of its player base by spring of 2021. Now what you need to understand is that the game was in such a critical condition on launch day that it literally needed a ton of bug fixes and patches to even be lifted from the ground up before CD Projekt Red could even think of moving forward with new content and whatnot. That's why in the past 12 months alone the game received 11 updates in total, with 4 being major ones and 7 hotfixes in between them, all totaling over hundreds of fixes, changes and improvements, and all of that making a pretty big difference compared to how it was 12 months ago. This also meant that most of the extra content, DLCs, and most important the next gen upgrade had to be delayed for the first part of 2022, and also the roadmaps had to be changed in accordance to that, which leaves us off to today and the biggest changes we've seen up until today, so we will begin with those in case you're just making a comeback. Starting things off with the content and the biggest changes we've seen over the past year, this brings us to the free DLCs. We had 3 of these in total back in August of 2021, and these included the following. One of them was the alternate appearance for Johnny Silverhand. This added a brand new costume and an outfit for Silverhand that kinda turns him into a more punk rock version of himself. It might not be your taste, but it was added, so you have the option to activate it in the game's menu. On top of that, we also got 2 new jackets for V, including the luminescent punk jacket and the multi-layered leather jacket, but both of these actually also feature their own crafting specs, meaning that you now have more options to craft legendary gear. These can be quite useful in the leveling process, but these are not the only ones that we got from the free DLCs. The final one was the brand new vehicle called the Quartz Bandit, and this one puts a different spin on one of the game's most common vehicles. It's actually a pretty decent one, a pretty nice top speed on it, and it's one of the easier to control cars in the game, so definitely something that you might want to get your hands on when you're playing. Now of course these aren't the only new additions. Of course they might seem insignificant when CD Projekt Red was mostly focusing on bug fixes, but we still got a few more things on top. Some of them included new legendary vendor gear upgrades, so this was one of the biggest and most important personally, because it meant that now most of the vendors in the game could sell legendary quality clothing items, especially as you would get closer and closer to level 50. This was pretty much impossible prior to patch 1.3 because a major bug that was affecting most of the sellers in Cyberpunk 2077. Now, not only do you find the legendary gear, but also their respective crafting recipes. In total, this means dozens, if not even hundreds, of brand new gear pieces, possible combinations, and ways to display your character in even cooler ways, which was again not really possible prior to update 1.3, at least not when we're talking about legendary quality and having the most amount of upgrade slots. But of course, it didn't just stop to this. We also got the max stack gear, which was one of the most sought after outfits in the game, especially since we previously thought it was inaccessible. It finally became a reward after finishing Judy's side missions and also getting the keys to her apartment, but it was totally worth it because now you could get access to one of the coolest looking and of course one of the most inspiring gear pieces in Cyberpunk 2077. Finally, we also got a brand new cyberware implant. The optical camo was made available between update 1.2 and update 1.3, of course added at one of the Ripper docks in the eastern part of the game. This was data mined early 2021 and finally made available a few months later, but totally worth it because it's one of the best cyber implants in the game to this day, as it pretty much makes the user invisible. And if you know the AI of Cyberpunk 2077, you kind of know how useful that is in most of the combat scenarios, as it gives you pretty much unhinged control over the battlefield once you're going in invisible and taking down all of these enemies super easy without them ever knowing where you are. Now, of course, we can't talk about new stuff being added without also mentioning how it feels and how it plays on different platforms. I was able to play the game and test it out on the PC, PlayStation 5 and PS4 Pro, which I know it doesn't cover all platforms, but it should paint a better picture of what you should expect from the game right now. Now, the game generally fares a lot better than how it did on launch day, despite some of the lingering problems still persisting. So even on the PlayStation 4 Pro that I played on, it didn't feel as bad as it did back in December of 2020. In fact, my experience was a lot smoother than how it was back then. Despite all of this, I did notice something between the platforms. The further you go back down into the old gen, the less enjoyable the game feels and the more it loses from its wow effect. So let me give you a few comparisons, starting with the crowd density. It's undeniable that the PC version has the highest crowd density of all platforms, especially when playing on highest settings. The game feels alive and bustling with life, while central areas are crowded with lots of NPCs. I've noticed that there's a major difference in density when going from PC to PS5, but from PS5 to PS4 Pro, it was barely noticeable under most circumstances. Even when comparing the exact same areas, the shots seemed very similar, which makes sense because, yeah, even the new gen consoles still run the old gen version of the game. This will likely change with the next gen upgrade that will happen next year. Things start changing when you do things that are a bit more resource intensive, like driving too fast or engaging in multiple activities at the same time. The most jarring problem on the old gen can be seen during these high-speed moments when the console will literally struggle with asset streaming. You will oftentimes see roads or buildings failing to load in front of you, resulting in this ugly low-res texture people have been complaining about since day one. Pop-in also manifests, and it's clear there's a setting in the game that will reduce the amount of cars and traffic to avoid further performance issues, especially on the old gen consoles. Despite this, the PS4 Pro FPS was still rather stable at around 30 with all of the patches that have been released over the past 12 months, but obviously these concessions had to be made in terms of performance and visual quality. But there are still many lingering problems from day one that I was able to notice. It's especially noticeable on the old gen consoles when NPCs, even cars, will fail to load properly even when simply running with your character at normal speeds. In many of these shots that you're seeing, I'm not even trying to cause these on purpose. These simply appear when just playing for a few minutes. They simply manifest themselves at every single step of the way. Also, various clothing items and accessories will not load properly under certain conditions. For example, in this case, it took this helmet almost 30 seconds to fully load in just normal gameplay, and there's many other like similar situations like these. But most important and by far the biggest problem that the game still has to this day in terms of general gameplay is still the downright non-existent AI. And there's two major issues that I have noticed with the AI even in the current version of the game. On one side, it manifests when you're just generally shooting or doing illegal activities when there's a crowd nearby. Simply shooting and then turning your camera and turning it back will make almost every single crowd, no matter how many NPCs inside of it, to completely disappear, which is one of the most jarring experiences I've seen in any AAA game up to this date. This problem will manifest itself on every single platform, on every single, well, version of the game, no matter the settings that you're using. I've noticed this on the PS4, PS5 and PC, and it didn't matter what settings I applied to my game. And even more important, the lack of chase or, well, police AI in this game is another really big problem. To this day, police will simply not chase you, and it's like super easy to just escape any star rating in the game. It doesn't matter if it's like 3 or 4 stars, you just run a couple of blocks away with a car or on foot and police will literally stop chasing you. Of course, I do have to mention that there was a slight improvement to the AI made a few months back, in the sense that police will spawn a little bit further away from your character, but overall behavior wise it still acts the exact same, which is just bare bones. So my final verdict after all of this is as follows. When we're talking about a full priced Cyberpunk 2077 game, at the current time, I do not recommend it. I do not recommend spending a full $60 price tag or even a $45 price tag on the game, even in its current state after all of these patches. But if you're talking about a heavy discount, like at least 50%, and even more so using the links down below that I have, for example, that give you a 70% discount, then yes, I believe that in that situation, it is definitely worth it. Still, Cyberpunk 2077 is an amazing experience. There is quite a lot of content for you to enjoy. There's hundreds of hours in there to enjoy, especially when it comes to some of the side content that this game has to offer. It's also a pretty amazing narrative, and I do enjoy many of the characters that the game had to offer, and I think that many of you out there will do the same. So from this perspective, the game is definitely worth it. But most important, if you do manage to get it at a heavy discount, it will definitely pay out in the future, as CD Projekt Red is preparing quite a lot of content in 2022. So that is my final verdict. Totally let me know down below what do you think of it, and especially so, have you played the game? Are you looking forward to future content? If not, totally let me know down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.